Hello, my name is Shelby Amata. I'm currently working at Starbucks. I actually used to work in a preschool classroom a couple years ago, but I decided to focus on school and get my schooling done. Um, for my classroom demographic, I actually use my old students from when I was working in preschool. And since I didn't have access to a classroom library, I was so grateful to have a colleague of mine lend me some books from her classroom library. All right, so starting off with gender, the top two in the bluish color, those are going to be the books that I found in the library. And then the bottom is going to be my classroom demographic. So I have 12 students in my classroom. Um, so total of 12 children, and they all range from 4 to 5 years old. So as you can see, there I didn't include the non-binary and the non-gender specific category because unfortunately there was no books that I found. So after noticing that, I know that I do need to add more books. So for example, I definitely know I would like to add I Am Me by Susan Verde, and it's a book about a child being different and wondering why sometimes like they think they need to fit the mold, but then they look around and they see the world is very different already. So why not be their true authentic selves, which I love because I do want to promote children to be authentic and be themselves and feel free to express themselves no matter what others may think. And then these are going to be three of the books I recommend. So, starting off with Being You, it's about a book about being yourself and really helping children understand other differences like gender with each other. Underneath is going to be one of my favorites. It's Pink is for Boys, and it talks about um, the bias of pink is for girls and blue is for boys, which is something I'm sure everyone has heard before. So it just really reframes that bias and encourages children to really express themselves. And then lastly, it's going to be the book No Difference Between Us, which talks about differences and similarities between the genders. So you'll see things like, oh, firemen are only men, but that's not true, is it? Because I've definitely seen firefighters that are women, or, vice versa, nurses are only girls, but that's not true because there's a lot of male nurses. All right, so moving on to race category. As far as the books that I found, I'm a little impressed with the amount of variety of races that I did find in throughout the books. Um, for just the characters, I would say I'm pretty okay with these numbers. I would definitely want to add more, obviously, Middle Eastern or Native Indigenous books. And then for the main characters, you could see a real big jump in numbers from the main white characters and the non-human characters. But there's still representation of all the other races as well. But like I said before, definitely want to touch base on the Middle Eastern and Native Indigenous books. Um, in my classroom demographic, a big majority of my students are white, and in my classroom that year, we did not have any Black or Native students. But for as far as books, like I said, it contained white characters, main characters. But the library is pretty good. I would say it's subpar at representing other races, but definitely could be worked on. And so these are some of the books that I currently have in the library. The Conjure Woman, who is basically a healing woman, and her son wants to learn more about that. And then Mama Do You Love Me is about Eskimos. And then Babushka's Doll is about a Russian girl whose babushka doll comes to life. And for book recommendations, starting off with The Skin You Live In, it touches base on self esteem, acceptance, and diversity. And then the middle book, Our Skin, is actually this by the same author from our previous book, Being You. But this one talks about activism and different types of skin tones and different colors of skin tones. And then lastly, Happy on Our Skin goes over every single color that you could think of for skin tones, and it reminds children why they are so wonderful. And I really like this book because it goes over your skin tone, but it really describes it. So for example, it'll be her skin is like caramel and it will kind of relate it to food, which I think is fun. So like caramel corn or something silly like that. But I think it's a really fun book, but as well as relaying the message to my students about skin tones and differences and accepting and loving the skin you're in. For settings, I would say that my classroom demographic, there's no kids that live in rural areas and in the desert. I mean, I would think it's cool if my kids lived in the desert, but I mean, I live very in the city. So if any of them did live in the desert, I'd be very shocked, but I would be like, hey, that's pretty cool. I would want to see their home, definitely. For the books, I would say that we have a good amount of books that represent all the types of settings. Obviously, desert is the lowest, so I would want to add more books that are desert-based. As far as rural areas, that's my top, the books that have the most amount in my library. But for the children who live in the urban areas and suburban areas, I do have books that represent their areas, so they're able to relate and say, hey, that looks like my fence, or that looks like my backyard, so they can really see themselves in the book. And then the Tale of Rabbit and Coyote is kind of like the tale of the rabbit and the hare. So, and this is based in the desert, and they have really good illustrations in this book. And then here are my 3 recommendations. The first one is Your Home, My Home, Your Home, Our Home, which talks about how everyone has different homes, but everyone needs a place to live. So as you can see on the cover of the book, it kind of just goes all over the world and talks about different houses people live in all over the world. The second one is A Home is a Window. This one's about a little girl who basically, her and her family move from one house to the other, and they really discover what truly makes a home, whether that's the materials in it, the love in their home, things like that. And then the last book is A Place Called Home, which goes through the different homes all over the world, and then it just shows you how others live all across the world. So you could see people live on boats, some people live in huts, some people live in apartment buildings. So it really shows children how others live across the world, and that their home may be very different, but they might also share a lot of similarities that they never knew of. And then I decided to add economic diversity to kind of the setting category or topic because, like I said before, the children in my classroom come from nicer homes and they live in urban and suburban areas. So I thought it was really important to include books to my library that showed, low income families or other families that might not have big homes or things like that. So I thought these 2 books, A Penny in My Pocket, which is which talks about you don't have to have a lot to give to others who have nothing. So you don't have to have a lot of money to help someone in need. And then Saturday at the Food Pantry is about a little girl and her mom who have food insecurities and how they don't have enough food always for themselves. So on Saturdays, they visit the food pantries to get some food. Moving on to disability. Currently in my classroom, we have no children or families with disabilities. And then I only found 2 books in my library that had characters with disabilities. So that is very something that I know I need to work on. And I definitely want to add more books. An example of a book I would want to add is about What Happened to You, and it's about a little boy who lost his leg, and he talks about it, and the little girl's very curious. So I think it's a great way to encourage kids to, become comfortable with others and seeing others who might not have an arm, for example, or who might not be able to see. So, becoming familiarized and comfortable with seeing others who look different than themselves. And some book recommendations that talk about disabilities. The first book and last book, My Brother is Different and My Brother Charlie, come from the point of view of children who have siblings who have disabilities, like autism and other forms of disability. And I like the book My Brother Charlie because the little girl talks about how her brother's brain works in a special way. And she talks about how special her brother is, which I really love. And then the book in the middle included is a book for all children to learn about inclusion, empathy, equality, disability, diversity, and diversity. So I think it's a great book for all children to read, so they can learn different things like empathy, equality, and disabilities. For sexual orientation, I have no books that represent lesbian, gay, or bisexual characters. And I actually have a student who comes from a family of two moms. So it is really important for me to work on that and to add books that show that. So the little girl is able to say, hey, that looks like my family, or my mommy and my mom look like that. And these are the two books I would like to add to my library. Zack's Safari is about a little boy who has a two-mom family. And then Stella Brings a Family is about a two-dad family. So I thought it was important to have some books like that because there are some families that look like that in our classroom. So being able to have them be like, hey, that looks like my family, or even learning about what other families look like is very important. For family structure, books in the library that have family structure other than a mom, dad, and two children is 6 books. And students in my classroom who have other than 2 parents and 2 children, I have actually none. All of them have very nuclear families, but it is important to represent other families so they know what other families look like and have different, like, show the differences and similarities of other different families. These 2 to the side are there's some books there in my library. I gave you The Purpose, about a single mom, and then Raising You Alone is about a single mom family as well. And like I said, I would definitely want to add more books to talk about family structures. So the first book is A Family is a Family is a Family, which is about a teacher who asks her students about what makes their family special. And all the students really talk about things that are all so different from each other, but at the end, it's love is what makes a family. And then the second book, What Makes a Family, talks about blended families, foster families, and all families in between. And then the last book, All Kinds of Families, talks about different families all over the world, and it shows all types so children feel represented. So it'll show things like grandma, grandpa family, same-sex family, adoptive families, things like that. So like I said before, just because my students come from very nuclear families, representing all families in my classrooms and showing the children what other families look like is extremely important. Moving on to language, books in the library with languages other than English or characters who speak only English, I have none. And in my classroom, I have 3 children who are actually multilingual. Some of the languages that are spoken in my classroom are Spanish, Japanese, Turkish, and Chinese. And a book I really liked and I wanted to add in my library was Mina's First Day of Preschool. It's a Chinese-based book, so it has English in it, it has some Chinese, which I thought was pretty neat. And then for language book recommendations, all of these 3 books actually just basically touch base on all the languages all over the world. So how to say hello in different languages, how to say welcome in 1,000 languages, and with A Wonderful World, it just goes, like I said, it goes over all different languages all around the world. For religion, books in the library that feature characters participating in religious practices or events, I have none. And then I have 2 students who practice Judaism in my classroom. So like I said before, I have, just because, I only have 2 students who, are religious or, practice one type of religion, it's important to highlight all religions, just to show children all the differences and similarities all around the world, and to appreciate and respect others' religions is important. So starting off with the recommendations, Let's Celebrate talks about all the special types of days celebrated around the world. So in Japan, they celebrate Kids Day and things like that. And then in the middle, Welcome to Our World highlights all the different types of religions. And then My Religion, Your Religion is about a book about a boy who is Christian but actually goes to I believe a synagogue, so a Jewish-based church type thing. So he's like, oh, he's a little uncomfortable, but once he goes, he's like, wow, so my religion is a little similar to yours, so they can really celebrate each other's religions. And lastly, coming to mirrors and windows. So I just want to briefly describe both. For mirrors, it's books that are mirrors. Books are mirrors when children can see their own lives reflected throughout the story. I thought that my library did a good job, or an okay job, with the topics of gender, setting, and race. Now, I know that I'm missing the non-binary and gender-specific books for gender. Just because the children I have in my classroom don't relate to that right now, it is definitely a good idea to represent, non-binary and non-gender specific children, or have those books in my classroom. So I know I need to work on that, just because for future, like, what if I have a child, in my classroom has that? I'm not really representing them, so they're not going to feel included. For windows, books are windows when the books allow children to view others' lives and stories that are different from their own. I thought my library did a good job on the topics family structure and disability, because I did have a couple of books in my library that show disability as well as different family structures. Like I said before, the children in my classroom come from nuclear families, so seeing different families that look different from their own are very important. Like two grandmas, or grandma, grandpa, dad, mom, having differences like that is very important, because it shows, a child, like, just because they look different from my own doesn't mean that they don't come from a loving home, or they have a family. And to me, like, at the end of the day, family is love, and if there's love, it's a family. But in summary, really, I think that the library in my classroom definitely needs some work. I would say we definitely need more books on religion, language, sexual orientation. I definitely want to add more books on family structures, all topics. I would definitely want to add more books, because just because I have some books doesn't mean that I don't need more. Thank you for listening to my presentation, and I look forward to hearing recommendations of books from you guys. Thank you.